Last week at Beef and Lamb AGM held in Invercargill, the government has extended the winter grazing rules coming into play for a further 12 months. National Party agricultural spokesperson David Bennett has said that Parker really had no choice but to defer the regulations, saying that it didn't stack up scientifically or practically. He joins us now from on the road. David, what do you make of this? I mean, the farming community's been up in arms about it for some time, not because of the rhetoric that they don't want freshwater quality to improve, but for the fact that this is just straight out impractical on an area, region by region basis.
Yeah, and we all want to have the right of our environmental outcomes, so there's no debate on that. The question is how you do it, and there's one way of doing it, which is a top-down approach where you set rules from Wellington and you expect everyone to follow them, and that's what Parker and O'Connor have been doing. It's shown to have been a failure. The intensive winter grazing rules was just one of the areas which they've run into trouble in. The slope rules just aren't there, and the maps just don't correlate with people's land and their properties. You're seeing the nitrogen levels that we're going to have a din and those kind of rates coming through. They've pulled out of that as well. So it's had a whole myriad of things that have gone wrong with that process, and it's the wrong approach because it's not letting farmers lead the charge of making the environmental gains that we need. And farmers do that all the time, and they would continue to do that if they were given the tools. Now, if we look specifically at the Southland case, well done to those farmers that got together and put up a constructive case around the issue. From Parker's comments in Parliament that night when he announced it, it appeared that he had no choice. He couldn't implement them anyway in the next year, and he's just playing for a bit of time. I'd be very doubtful if he actually does end up delivering exactly what farmers would want to see happen. I think that we don't know the criteria he's going to assess the modules on, and we don't know whether he would be satisfied at certain levels. And he needs to come clean with that so farmers know what they've got to achieve in the next year, so that he hasn't just delayed these rules for a year.
Well, that is the thing, isn't it, is that, yes, one thing is some breathing space, but the other is just another 12 months of more uncertainty as well. But, David, I mean, the rise of the anti-winter grazing movement and the farming community needing to take an internal look at itself around some of these practices, if O'Connor and Parker hadn't come in with the sledgehammer the way it has, do you think the industry would have had to make changes in the direction that it needs to?
Yeah, well, it would be an ongoing part of the process, and that's where if you set more of a directional approach, that industry and regional councils and farming bodies can come together and look at solutions around, you get much better results. And you would have got much better results in Southland if we had taken that approach rather than the strict approach that's being taken. But these freshwater regulations haven't just been done off the bat. They're very calculated. Like in certain regions, they impact those regions more than others. For example, if you look at the intensive winter grazing really affects through Southland through the Manawatu, whereas much of the other parts of the country aren't so affected by it. If you look at the nitrogen rules, really affect mid-Canterbury and areas like that, so whether they have the irrigation on dairy land. So they've been very specific in these rules, and each of them basically attacks a certain region in some way, and that actually divides and conquers, I guess, the regions. And so rather than having the whole of New Zealand up in arms over one rule, they've very much isolated each area, and I think there's been a calculated approach. The problem with it is they hadn't actually thought through the rules, and they hadn't actually done their work around how they'd actually implement them, and that's where they've fallen down around things like the mapping and actually implementation. So, I think this is a very contrived process by two ministers, and I don't for one moment accept that they just got it wrong or they tried too hard, that they knew exactly where they were going.
Right, and I think the likes of the resowing date of the 1st of October, that farmers said, well, if we stuck to a date with waterlogged paddocks, we're actually going to have a worse environmental outcome. Just let us get on and farm the way we understand for the right outcome. But the other thing that strongly came through in all parts of the country is how under-resourced and overwhelmed our regional councils were with this.
Yeah, well, Horizons were looking at, say, $10 to $15 million in extra compliance costs for them to get staff and such like. So that's part of his issue down in Southland, I think, is actually implementing it, and whether legally he can do it at this time anyway. So, they've run into all that kind of trouble, and that's the problem of having a strict approach. You just think that you can force it on people and then you'll accommodate that within very short time frames. It just doesn't work that way. We've got to build up that base of people with technical knowledge. We've got to actually investigate which rules will actually have the best effect in environmental outcomes, but also in economic outcomes. And so all that takes time, and that's why you need a much more balanced approach where it is pragmatic, it is science-based, and that's in comparison with what we've got at the moment.
Mm. Now,
and in the end, it puts the environmental change backward, because if you have a strict approach, nobody can work within. Then we lose another couple of years in that public debate of actually being seen as better environmental stewards.
Yes.
So it backfires in the end.
It does. It definitely backfires in the global perception of what's happening in New Zealand the longer we keep this up. And that's something I want to continue to highlight, because everything, even the show, is broadcast globally. And so therefore we just need to find a way to get on with it relatively quickly. So I definitely agree with that. But the thing is too, David, you're in opposition, and the farming community is feeling very under-supported politically. What are you doing on the ground behind the scenes to ensure that you are being extremely noisy on not only the winter grazing, but my biggest concern is how ridiculous it is that COVID-free Pacific Island REC workers are not able to come in, and we've got hundreds of millions of dollars worth of fruit falling on the ground with extremely stressed growers.
Yeah, well, that's exactly why we had a policy weekend that we put out there, which is that we're asking the government to open the Pacific bubble, which is a National Party policy. It's something that we've put forward, and that is around having the island bubble with people coming from places like Tonga and Samoa and Fiji, that we have a close relationship as a country with, and also they have the ability to send people here to work now. Horticultural sector through the RSD scheme. So it's a starting point. There's a lot more that could be extended, but that would give a very valuable signal to the horticultural sector that are doing a tremendous job trying to get New Zealanders to work for them, but it just hasn't happened to the extent that has been desired by the government or by the industry. They need those RSC workers. They're skilled people, and we set up a policy framework for that Pacific Island bubble in the weekend that would enable that to happen. We haven't had the government come in and reply to that. They haven't said, yes, that's something we can do. We've been pushing for the wider bubble with Australia for the last few months to assist with sectors like tourism. They're finally starting to move on that now. But the RSC one, we've put out a really good policy, and it's up to the government to pick that up and implement that. And it's well thought through. It's constructive, and it's working in the best interest in supporting our horticulture. So we're working like that to put real solutions ahead of the government, and we just need them to actually listen to the farmers and the horticulturists and to actually deliver some of those policies as well.
Yes, and the thing is, what you talked about, the fact that we need the migrant workers to fill this shortage, that Kiwis either don't want to or have the capacity to work in a seasonal environment. But the labour shortage or the skill shortage across the primary industry is not just at harvest point. point. It's at every single point along the way. And we're still talking about finding 50,000 people. What assurance can you give, should National be in government next term, that you will work cross-portfolio to ensure a serious lack of education within our high school education curriculums, that our brightest children understand the career pathways? It's actually getting to a severely breaking point, David, and I know the communities that I talk to really, really want this to be a focus of the government.
Yeah, and you're certainly right. It's just not RSE workers. You've got the sheep scanners, for example, your dairy workers. There's a whole lot of raft of people coming from overseas as a part of our sector, and so it's just not one area. I think the first thing is we've got to value the primary sector and all we do, and COVID did give us and has given us a chance to get a little bit more profile and a little bit more public acceptance for what we do, because they need us, because we're the only foreign exchange earner for the country, and we're the thing that's keeping this country going at the moment. So that understanding has been good. The second thing I think we need to make sure is that we do actually have the financial rewards there for people to go ahead and want to get into it. We just can't force the next generation of children to be farmers and growers without actually having the financial rewards so that they can actually see that it is a comparable career choice from some of the other career choices they may have in front of them. And that's really important, that we have that signal sent within our industries around the profitability and the ability to go ahead and to get into farm ownership and management and all those other roles. Then you've got all the downstream roles that are connected with farming, the service roles, the advice, we talked about that environmental type advice. Those are very important positions that we need to get our brightest and best going into as well. So we've got that scientific capability and technology to make sure that we're at the forefront of the industries around the world. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and we're certainly pushing that. I was just at Massey and Lincoln the last few weeks, and 60% of the students there are female. That's great to see young women coming into our sector, seeing they've got that potential, seeing they've got that opportunity, and wanting to make farming their future. So that is happening at that level. We need to make sure that profitability is there as well.
Thank you so much for your time. Spokesperson for Agriculture and National Parties, David Bennett there, joining us from the road, covering off a couple of topics there.